There are moments when something seemingly meaningless, a flicker in the eye, a repeated number, a forgotten word whispered by a stranger, pulls at us like gravity. The mind labels it coincidence. But what if it's not the mind analyzing? What if it's the soul remembering? You notice a pattern, you feel a presence, a phrase won't leave your thoughts. And though nothing in the outside world changes, inside, something shifts. As if a veil lifted for a second, exposing the architecture of a reality your senses weren't trained to grasp. The detail becomes obsession, but not because it is trivial, because it speaks. It speaks in a language before language, in signs, in shivers, in paradoxes. It's not the object itself, it's the echo it carries. And this is where the paradox begins. Many seek spiritual liberation, but unknowingly replicate the very prisons they escaped from, only now decorated in celestial metaphors and rituals of light. They chant freedom while their souls whisper exile. The truth is, most of what we call spiritual awakening begins not with enlightenment, but with discomfort, a strange tension, like a string pulled between this world and another. Like the soul is knocking, not with answers, but with questions you've spent lifetimes trying to ignore. These are not signs of madness. They are symptoms of memory, and they suggest something wild. Your soul may still be deeply connected to a realm you thought you left behind, the 5D matrix of meaning, intuition, and sacred remembering, a place not above earth, but stitched beneath it, a place that whispers through obsession, detail, and déjà vu. This video is a descent, not into theory, but into mystery. We are not here to explain, we are here to evoke, because sometimes the smallest detail is the door. She saw 1111 again, not just on the clock, on receipts, on license plates. It followed her like a secret, one that she hadn't learned to read yet. At first it felt like magic, then it became a necessity, a moment of spiritual dopamine, proof that something divine hadn't forgotten her, that the universe was winking. But slowly it turned into hunger. The absence of a sign felt like rejection, as if silence meant she was abandoned by the cosmos. So she searched harder, waited longer, measured worth by the symmetry of the symbols. This is the path of the diviner's shadow, the one who needs to control meaning in order to feel safe, who reads the stars not for beauty, but to escape the terror of not knowing. Yet the soul doesn't use GPS. It doesn't offer reassurance. It invites disorientation. It speaks in interruptions, in synchronicities that don't arrive when expected. We are not meant to decipher the signs like maps. We are meant to feel them like dreams, to let the mystery bend us inward. Jung once said that symbols are the best possible expressions for something we have no words for. But in the age of obsessive sign hunting, symbols are being treated like commands, as if their purpose were to explain instead of evoke. There is a cost to this addiction. We trade intuition for interpretation. We feed the ego with confirmation instead of feeding the soul with presence. And yet, the signs still come. They are not punishments, nor toys. They are mirrors. They reflect not answers, but the state of your listening. So the question is not, what does 1111 mean? The real question is, what ache inside you needs the number to mean something? Because it is that ache that's trying to speak. And it doesn't speak in numbers. It speaks in silence. There are altars so beautiful they hide despair. She arranged her crystals like an orchestra. Each incense stick burned in perfect symmetry. The candle flames danced like rehearsed rituals. Her room smelled of sage. Her bookshelf was an archive of cosmic wisdom. But something trembled beneath it all. Something messy, human, unlit. The sacred had become scenery. It is the tragedy of the spiritual aesthete, the one who builds a temple so flawless it silences the very parts of the soul that came seeking refuge. The shadow, uninvited, lingers at the door, The desire for harmony can be a subtle war against the chaos we refuse to love, against the grief we haven't yet named, against the rawness of being unhealed in a world obsessed with appearing luminous. This is the spiritual ego in velvet robes, delicate, adorned but armored. It wants transcendence but not exposure. It welcomes light but not the flicker of doubt. It decorates the inner cave with symbols of awakening but never enters it fully. Beauty is not the problem, but when beauty becomes performance, when ritual becomes theater, we must ask, is this devotion or is it disguise? The soul doesn't require perfection to appear. Often it arrives through disorder, through tears that leave salt on the lips, through messy prayers that begin in bitterness, through silence, not curated stillness, but the aching kind, the one that holds too much truth to be aesthetic. Carl Jung spoke of the importance of holding the tension of opposites, not choosing between chaos and order, but letting them sit at the same table. When we sanctify only what's visually pleasing, we exile half of our being. And yet, the temptation is understandable, because when the inner world feels like a storm, the external must be controlled. The altar becomes an anchor. But when the altar becomes a prison, when the incense hides the rot, when the mantra silences the scream, we have lost the thread. So ask yourself, if your sacred space suddenly became ugly, would your soul still feel at home there? Would you? Because the most honest altars are not seen by others. They are built in the dark, with trembling hands, and they burn without needing to look divine. There are words that open portals, and there are words that build walls made of light. He spoke of frequencies, of dimensional upgrades, of DNA activations. His voice carried the certainty of someone who had seen behind the veil. But as he spoke, something else became visible. Not a deeper truth, but a subtle separation. As if each sacred word was a rung on a ladder only the awakened could climb. The language of the soul had become a currency. It's a paradox. We use words to connect, yet often spiritual language becomes a password, a way of saying, I belong and you don't. When we repeat phrases like high vibration, third eye, or timeline shift, do we still feel their essence? Or have they become polished armor to shield us from the rawness of simply saying, I'm lost? There is an archetype that haunts this terrain, the wounded priest. He carries sacred knowledge but forgets to translate it. His wound is not the absence of truth, but the inability to descend it into human tenderness. He has climbed the mountain of understanding, but now fears returning to the valley where people still bleed. Spiritual elitism rarely wears arrogance. It wears fluency. It cloaks itself in symbols, in terminology, in performative humility, and it forgets that the true language of the soul was never made of syllables. It was made of silence, dreams, images, and tears. The collective unconscious speaks differently. It whispers through metaphors, through the body, through that unnamed ache in the chest when you hear an old song. It does not care for your vibration. It cares whether you're listening. This is not a rejection of spiritual language. It is a return to its root, because every word once came from a wound. Every sacred term was born from someone trying to make meaning of the ineffable, to dress the invisible in the garments of sound. But once it becomes code, exclusive, ego-boosting, rigid, it loses its pulse. So perhaps it's time to speak again like the soul does, not to convince, not to impress, but to remember. Speak like you're translating a dream. Speak like you're holding someone's grief. Speak like you're not afraid to be misunderstood, because the soul understands even when the mouth fails. There is a silence that calms, and there is a silence that numbs. She meditated every morning. Eyes closed, breath slow, candles lit, but beneath the serenity, a pulse of avoidance beat quietly. She wasn't diving into herself. She was escaping guilt, escaping the unnamed grief that lived in her ribs, escaping the raw humanity of her own sorrow. In the pursuit of lightness, she had become weightless. This is the trap of chasing elevated sensations, when transcendence becomes anesthesia, when joy becomes a goal rather than a byproduct of being real, when stillness is used to avoid the scream of something ancient inside. In the body, cortisol and serotonin dance a silent war. The guilt we haven't processed floods us with stress. And in the hunger for relief, we seek the spiritual serotonin through meditation, breathwork, rituals. But if these become escapes, not encounters, we are only repressing what the soul needs to express. The truth is, dense emotions are not failures. They are sacred messengers. Grief is a form of truth. Rage is a form of boundary. Shame, though distorted, carries the outline of a buried self. To spiritualize only the beautiful is to fragment the divine. There is a kind of spiritual bypassing that doesn't look like denial. It looks like perfection. But the soul doesn't evolve by skipping steps. It evolves by walking through every emotional room, barefoot, and listening to what the silence inside each one has to say. Because meditation, when honest, doesn't silence pain. It reveals it. It pulls it up from the basement. It lays it on the floor like a wounded animal asking, "Will you finally sit with me now?" Real presence is not just witnessing the light. It's staying when the shadows cry. It's choosing not to transcend, but to descend into the very parts of yourself that feel too heavy to carry. And in that descent, something changes. The elevated state you were chasing begins to emerge. Not as a peak experience, but as a quiet recognition that your darkest feeling is still made of soul. He believed in manifestation. He repeated affirmations. He visualized outcomes with perfect clarity. Every morning, he scripted his reality. Every evening, he tracked synchronicities. But underneath the rituals, his hands were trembling, not from power, from fear. The fear that if he stopped controlling reality, it would collapse on him. There's a hidden terror inside the compulsion to co-create everything. The terror of letting life be unknown. The terror of not being the architect of every detail. The terror of surrendering control to something greater. Something that doesn't always explain itself. We've been told we are creators. But when creation becomes coercion, the soul is no longer leading. It's performing. This is the subtle prison of spiritual control. It wears the robe of empowerment, but it tightens around the neck when outcomes don't obey. It promises liberation, but demands constant vigilance. It says, if you're suffering, it's your fault. You misaligned. You didn't visualize hard enough. The archetype here is the exhausted mage, the one who spent lifetimes mastering the elements, only to discover that miracles, when forced, lose their magic. He is powerful and lonely. He trusts in energy, but not in rest. He fears chaos more than he reveres mystery. And so he casts spell after spell, while forgetting how to pray. The soul doesn't thrive under tyranny, even spiritual tyranny. It thrives in rhythm, in listening, in surrendering to timing that does not serve the ego's hunger. There's a difference between intention and interference. To set an intention is to plant a seed. To obsessively control is to dig it up every morning, panicking if it hasn't bloomed. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is let go. Let go of micromanaging your path. Let go of scripting your life like a divine accountant. Let go of the illusion that if you relax, the universe will forget you. It won't. The soul doesn't need a blueprint. It needs trust. And in that trust, the invisible starts to breathe again. She said, "I don't belong on this planet." Her voice didn't carry wonder. It carried exhaustion. Not the sacred kind, but the weary ache of someone trying to give cosmic language to very human pain. Sometimes the soul says, "I am from the stars." But sometimes that sentence is just trauma dressed in light. In spiritual circles, there's a growing vocabulary that masquerades as healing, but often becomes a shortcut around it. I'm a starseed. My soul is from another dimension. I'm absorbing collective pain. These may be true, but too often they become premature diagnoses, labels applied before the wound has spoken. The danger is not in the symbols. It's in using them to escape the body's truth. The pain of abandonment doesn't disappear when we say, "I chose this incarnation." The grief of not being seen doesn't heal because we call ourselves empaths. The childhood rupture still echoes, even if we reframe it as a soul contract. This is where the symbolic becomes bypass. The wound is real. The soul may be vast. But if we don't integrate, we split. We wear stellar language to avoid the earthly one. Trauma, rejection, loss, longing. And slowly, spirituality becomes a kind of emotional translation error. Instead of therapy, we seek charts. Instead of feeling, we analyze past lives. Instead of sitting with sadness, we channel guides. But the soul is not in a hurry to transcend the human. It came here to live it, to feel the weight of skin, to tremble in the face of grief, to walk barefoot through confusion and still whisper yes to being here. The real healing doesn't dismiss the stars. It just doesn't use them to avoid the mud, because true cosmic connection never denies our roots, it deepens them. So before diagnosing your soul as not from here, ask, have I fully met what's here? Have I held the part of me that feels alien, not to this planet but to myself? Because integration begins when we stop escaping meaning and begin listening to it, even when it hurts. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from rejection, but from believing you're too different to be embraced. He walked into the room and already felt like an echo, as if his soul were tuned to a different key, one that others couldn't hear. He had wisdom, depth, visions, but he also had a secret wound. No one will ever truly understand me. This is the shadow of the chosen one, the archetype of the voluntary exile. It begins with genuine sensitivity, intuition, soul memory. But when those gifts are met with confusion or mockery in childhood, the psyche builds a story. I am not from here. I am not like them. I must protect my uniqueness at all costs. At first, it feels empowering, sacred, elevated. But over time, this belief becomes a cage made of gold. You're different but also isolated. You're gifted but disconnected. You belong to the cosmos but long for touch. Spiritual narcissism rarely looks like arrogance. It looks like withdrawal, like retreating into visions because the world feels too noisy, like using your mission to avoid vulnerability, like dressing rejection in the clothes of enlightenment. And yet, beneath the specialness is grief. Grief for never having been met in your truth. Grief for the masks you wore to survive. Grief for believing you had to leave humanity to be divine. The paradox is cruel. The more expansive your soul becomes, the harder it is to fit into small talk, surface relationships, or shallow environments. But expansion is not supposed to exile you. It's supposed to root you deeper into life. There is no spiritual growth that disconnects you from the heart. So what if your uniqueness was never meant to separate you? What if it was meant to reveal where you're needed most? The soul doesn't come to earth to be worshipped. It comes to belong, not by shrinking, but by softening, by saying, I am vast, and still I want to touch, to cry, to laugh in a room full of flawed, beautiful humans. You are not too special to belong. You are too sacred to keep pretending you don't need to. She traveled across lifetimes in her meditations, visited other realms in dreams, felt portals open in her spine when she chanted sacred syllables, but she forgot to drink water. She forgot to stretch. She forgot how to be in her body. This is the danger of multidimensional escape, the disembodied seeker, floating in cosmic awareness, but disconnected from the very temple that made the awareness possible. In the pursuit of soul expansion, the body is often treated as a mere vessel, temporary, secondary, heavy. But the truth is, The body is the soul's land, its ritual, its remembering. The nervous system holds truths the mind can't articulate. It contracts where the soul still holds trauma. It trembles when energy is unprocessed. It aches not because it's flawed, but because it's trying to speak. Sensitivity is not a license to avoid embodiment. It is an invitation to enter it more gently, more reverently, because every spiritual awakening must eventually root itself into the body, or it remains incomplete. The breath is a bridge. The gut is an oracle. The spine is a staff of memory. When you ignore the body in the name of evolution, you bypass the very process that makes evolution real. Rumi wrote, "There are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. The body is one of them, not a burden, not a distraction, but a sacred script written in bone and blood. To eat slowly is prayer. To rest deeply is alignment. To touch with intention is ceremony." This is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about letting the body weep when the soul is silent, letting it guide when the mind is confused, letting it pulse, ache, release. You are not just a multidimensional being. You are a biological miracle through which the soul dances. Honor it, not just as a tool, but as a teacher. He was always evolving, always reading, purging, recalibrating, always seeking the next initiation, the next unlocking, the next layer of his higher self. But when he sat alone, away from the practices and upgrades, he couldn't rest, because rest felt like failure. This is the shadow of the spiritual seeker, the belief that you must always be becoming, because being is never enough. The obsession with evolution often hides a wound, the fear of being whole. Wholeness threatens the identity of the seeker, because if you arrive, who are you without the quest? There's an addictive quality to eternal self-improvement. It mimics growth, but often masks avoidance. The psyche says, "I'm not ready yet. I still need to fix this part, clear that wound, master this frequency." And so the soul is placed on an endless treadmill, chasing the horizon of worthiness. But the soul doesn't evolve in straight lines. It spirals, it pauses, it retreats, and sometimes it rests. The archetype here is the wanderer who forgot to stop, who began the journey seeking truth, but ended up lost in the labyrinth of never-enoughness. This is not the same as healthy transformation. This is spiritual burnout disguised as devotion. We see it in the obsession with programs, activations, cosmic upgrades, in the need to constantly ascend, never integrate, to learn new tools, but never listen to the old wound still waiting for eye contact. The irony is brutal. The pursuit of infinite evolution can become a cage. You are not here to be in permanent healing mode. You are here to live, to embody, to rest inside your own sacred enough. Because true growth doesn't always feel like expansion. Sometimes it feels like coming home. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Sometimes it's the decision to stop and become what you already are. So ask yourself gently, are you evolving or are you avoiding? And what would it mean to trust that you are already worthy of arrival? She wrote affirmations every day. I am safe. I am worthy. I am healed. But when the night came and the house fell silent, the old voices returned, not to argue, but to whisper, you still don't believe yourself. This is the illusion of reprogramming without integration. A beautiful phrase cannot replace an unlived emotion. A positive thought cannot erase the body's memory. A mantra cannot hold what only presence can embrace. Spirituality often teaches us to upgrade our mindset, to rewrite the narrative. And yes, the brain is neuroplastic. Language does shape perception, but without integration, without walking into the cave of the original wound, we're not healing. We're repainting the prison. The danger here is subtle. We replace depth with repetition. We think change is happening because we're saying new things, But change only becomes transformation when we feel it in the bones, not just recite it in the mirror. This is the realm of the inner orphan, the part of you that was never seen, never held, never validated. You cannot reprogram her with slogans. You must sit beside her in silence, in shame, in remembrance. Carl Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Reframing too early is like placing flowers over a wound that's still bleeding. You don't need to speak better. You need to listen deeper, to the parts of you still frozen in a moment of abandonment, to the memory that hides behind the trigger, to the symbolism of your pain. Not to fix it, but to witness it. Integration is not about erasing the shadow. It's about inviting it to the inner table, giving it a voice, a role, a name. Only then can your affirmations root into something real. Only then can the reprogramming become a remembrance, not of who you should be, but of who you've always been beneath the noise. The soul doesn't want you to be perfect. It wants you to be whole. You thought it was just a detail, a repeated number, a strange coincidence, a phrase that echoed longer than it should. But what if that detail was the doorway? The soul doesn't shout. It gestures. Not with grand signs, but with quiet obsessions, with dreams that won't leave, with feelings that don't fit logic, yet won't go away. This is the language of the 5D soul matrix, not a place above you, but a memory within you, a living architecture of meaning that pulses behind reality. It doesn't pull you away from Earth, it roots you into it. You see, the 5D is not a destination. It's not an escape plan. It's not a hall of mirrors for the ego to admire its glow. It's a rhythm, a remembering, a return. Return to the sacred in the mundane. Return to the ritual in your body. Return to the ache that has always been your compass. You do not need to become more spiritual. You need to become more honest with what hurts, with what you hide, with what is waiting to be held. The details that obsess you may be fragments of a self you've forgotten, not because you failed, but because you were protecting something too beautiful to be named too soon. And now, it's time to listen, to slow down, to let the silence open its mouth and say your name in a way that no affirmation ever could. Because awakening is not about avoiding pain. It's about walking through it with meaning. And when you do, you don't ascend, you arrive. The sign you seek is already inside you. It's just waiting for your presence to remember what it means.